Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 68 of B-Road Ballers, the review series for Gran Turismo's hot hatches, and also to some degree, not necessarily hot hatches, but hatchbacks which you could say are sleeper cars. And there are a fair few of those on Gran Turismo, not as many as pure hot hatches, but there are some notable ones nonetheless. The Toyota Corolla, for instance, makes an excellent sleeper car, as do some others. Now, this particular vehicle doesn't get much use at all. It falls into a very similar category both in real life and on the game as, funnily enough, the Mercedes A-Class, at least of its initial generation. Now, the car is the Audi A2. It's a notable vehicle for a couple of reasons, some not as good as others. One notable thing about the car is that it uses quite a bit of aluminium in its construction, or aluminum for Americans, and in particular the body of the car is built out of aluminium, which I personally think is pretty cool. Then you also have the visual design of the car, which certainly will divide opinion. It's kind of like a dumpy version of, say, an A6 or an A3, in a similar way to the dumpiness of the Mercedes A-Class. Now, some people won't like that, some people will. Personally, I don't like the Mercedes A-Class, but I do like the Audi A2. I think this is actually a pretty cool looking car. Not exactly pretty, but interesting. It's different, and I like that. Now, as far as what it can do on the game, quite a few people probably don't really have a clue what it can do, because it's not the kind of car that most people use that much, if at all, and many players have probably never bought one or even driven one. So if you haven't bought one, maybe you're an Audi fan, as a lot of people are, the obvious choices are, of course, the S3 and the A3. So should this car tempt you away from those, perhaps as a small, compact, lightweight sleeper, or is it a kind of car that you can take or leave and it's not really that essential? Well, we have covered this car before in the Dark series, so I would obviously recommend checking it out, but in this series we go into the car in a different way. The Dark series is basically purely to highlight a vehicle that you should check out for whatever reason, whereas these series, such as B-Road Ballers or any other specific car group review series, is more about going into the potential of the car once you have bought it. So in effect you can view it as two different steps. The Dark series is encouraging you to buy the car, then these series are telling you what you can do once you've bought the car. Now, what can you do? Well, the engine is pretty small. It's a 1.4 turbo, it's front wheel drive, kind of a shame. All wheel drive would have been cool, an A2 Quattro if you will. The car is the cheapest Audi in the game at 22 grand, and it puts out fully tuned a pretty decent 260 horsepower and an even more impressive 274 foot-pounds of torque. It only weighs in 803 kilos, partially thanks of course to that aluminium construction, and the horsepower per tonne is, for a small hot hatch, pretty decent, 324. The fully tuned PP is maybe a little too high, but given the size and weight of the car that's not too surprising. It sits at 491 PP, which is pretty high for a car with 260 horsepower, but at the same time, you can kind of understand why it's that high. So, being as it is a pretty good car on paper, not mind-blowing, but good in a couple of ways, how does that translate to the track? Is it a good car? Is it a sleeper? Or, as I said earlier, is it, like the Mercedes A-Class, the kind of car which you should only buy if you fancy something quirky or different, or if the car specifically appeals to you? Well, to some degree, I would have to say, slightly unfortunately, because I am a fan of this car, that it falls into the latter category. This is certainly not an essential purchase in the way of something like a Focus ST or a Clio RS, those kind of cars that any enthusiast of the genre of car should definitely buy. This is not one of those cars. Definitely not. It's not essential. You will have very little use out of it for most scenarios, especially if you offer other cars as alternatives. There's really nothing that this car can do that any other hot hatch can't. That being said, it's not a bad car. The handling, I would say, is superb, mainly due to three things, of course: the size, the front-wheel drive chassis, and the low weight. Those put together make it really, I think, a joy to drive. It's very fun, it's very nimble, you can throw it through corners, and although due to the fact that it's not designed to be a performance car and that it has a fair bit of torque, it can spin up its tyres sometimes or have a little bit of understeer, it's not too bad. It's certainly not chronic in the case of this vehicle. Now, as far as straight line performance, I would have to say that that's probably this car's primary downside. The straight line power, especially mid-range and top end, is not very good. It does have pretty slow acceleration. It's not bad if you put this up against, say, another 260 horsepower hatch of a similar weight. It will be able to keep up with the car to some degree, but the problem is there aren't many other hatches with a similar power and weight, and most of them that are tend to be ones that people don't use either, so it's a little bit too niched for its own good in the similar way to the Mercedes A-Class. Now, it's not a bad car by any means, and actually I would recommend checking the car out purely because it's oddball and it's different and nobody uses it. And that alone is enough to intrigue me and make me want to buy it, but then once I did buy it, quite a while ago, I found that I really liked it, and this is a car that I do occasionally use, but importantly, I don't really use it for racing. I use it for cruising and just having fun. It's that kind of car, in a similar way to something like the classic BLRA Prince Skyline, which isn't hugely useful for any kind of competition, but is very fun to drive and just fun and quirky and different to own, and you don't see many people using them. So if that appeals to you, which it certainly does to me, then you should definitely check this car out. Just don't set your expectations too high, especially as far as straight line speed, and you won't be disappointed. For 22 grand, it's a nice bit of alternative fun, but as I said in the outset of the video, it's definitely not an essential purchase. But that's it overall for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.